You may have recognized that play. That was our own Rob Landsman recorded from his new home in Ohio. Here.
Oh, nice. Welcome, everyone. This is our multi-platform service for the Unitarian Church of Staten Island on June 18, 2023. We're here, I think this is sort of bookends, yes? Did you start us off in September?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, and now you're finishing us off before our summer,
Not
Right.
finishing you off.
finishing off before our summer break.
Yes.
And obviously, it's the Juneteenth weekend and Father's Day, so a lot to celebrate today. For those joining us in person, it's wonderful to have you with us. Please be sure to maintain social distancing, as masks are now optional. During the service, you can sing along to the hymns and read along to any responsive readings. Those attending in person are invited to join us in the parish hall through that door for hospitality after the service. We have a list of some of the things we do at this church. Weekly gatherings include our spiritual growth circle in the library at 12:30 p.m. We have a women's group that meets via Zoom on Wednesdays at 7:30, and you can see Kathy Santo, who is here somewhere, about that if you're interested in being added to that list. We also have a men's group, and you can see Tom Saluga in the back if you need information about the men's group and when it meets. Today we are also having a quick meeting to see if we have enough interest and to set the date perhaps for a yard sale in September. So if you're interested in a yard sale, find me and Kathy Santo, and we'll talk about the yard sale. For those joining us online, we send special greetings of welcome to you. We hope you take a minute to introduce yourself in the chat box. After service, you are all invited to a virtual coffee hour. For those joining us in person now, please silence your mobile devices at this time as we prepare for this morning's service.
The opening words today are from Robert Gould Shaw. As many of you know, Robert Gould Shaw grew up in the Church of the Redeemer, which is, our ancestor church on Staten Island. Lived in West Roxbury, Massachusetts, and born in Boston, and became one of the heroes of the Civil War, memorialized in the movie Glory from 1992, starring Matthew Broderick. And this is an example from, he wrote many letters home to his mother. This letter is from 1855, when he was 20 years old, and as many of the children of the wealthy Boston Brahmin class, he would summer in Europe. And this was a letter home that he wrote to his mother from Paris when he was 20 years old. And it shows you how some of the topics and things that are controversial today didn't begin today. It's really true that everybody at the hall thought I was a lady until I spoke in my own voice. Then it was very funny to see their astonishment. I was introduced to a great many ladies and gentlemen, and not one recognized me since. The dress made me look about as tall as Aunt Marie. He was 5'5". The powdered curled hair made my features look finer and my forehead very white. My cheeks were flush, and all put together made me a very good-looking lady, to judge from the compliments. I never enjoyed myself so much. Don't compare me with any of my aunts. I surpassed Aunt Marie by half. I only wish you could have seen me. I don't think you would have known me at all. It's a sad truth that I was obliged to shave, the prominence of my beard and mustache being an obstacle to my appearing as a woman. But without joking, it would have showed, especially by candlelight, so I took it off.
I invite you to join me now in lighting our chalice. You can find the words to the affirmation in your order of service. We light this chalice in the search for truth
and the spirit of love, we unite in worship and fellowship.
As an extension of lighting our chalice, I want to take a moment to light these candles for some of the names of those who have recently been affected by police brutality, knowing that we cannot cover all of the names of those affected. We light a candle for the life of Anne-Marie Ya Henderson. We light a candle for the life of LaCorvis Tamar Daly. Unfortunately, our candles are not lighting. We light a candle for the life of James Lanier. May this light be a symbol of our commitment to continue the work of racial justice and to proclaim that Black lives matter. Please join us now in singing hymn number 44, We Sing of Golden Mornings, and that's in your gray hymn. You want to do that? 44?
Sing of golden mornings, we sing of sparkling seas, of prairies, valleys, mountains, and stately forest trees. We sing of flashing sunshine and light bestowing rain, of birds among the branches, and springtime come again. We sing the heart courageous, the youthful eager mind. We sing of hopes undaunted, of friendly ways and kind. We sing of roses waiting beneath the deep bound snows. We sing the earth's great splendor, whose beauty round us glows.
We invite you all to share your joys and sorrows now. If you're visiting us for the first time, please introduce yourself. For those gathering in person, we invite you to raise your hand and then stand where you're seated. I will give you the microphone to share your joy or your sorrow. Please say your name and share what is in your heart. For those who are joining online, we invite you to type into the chat your joys and sorrows. Ben will then read them aloud. We invite you to share what is in your heart. Okay. Start over there. And people think about what you want to say.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Chaplain Stephanie Hamilton, and I am here worshiping with my good friend Bruce Gilligan.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Carol. I just want to say, kind of in reference to today's service, I'm a fifth-generation
generation Staten Islander. My family is originally from Port Richmond and were members of the Dutch Reformed Church on Castleton Avenue. Both my second great grandfather and second great uncle fought in the Civil War. One was my second great grandfather, James Mullen, was a member of the heavy artillery, and his brother-in-law, Simeon Higgins, was a member of the mounted rifles, which became, I think, the 7th Cavalry. Thankfully, they both came home.
I'd just like to mention that Larry Schwabacker is here. You may recall Larry has not been here for some time. He's been at Golden Gate, a rehab facility near here, and he has been there since October. And hopefully they're not keeping you until October, Larry. I don't know if you plan to say something when I get over there, but I want everybody to remember that you were
I
here.
feel like a prisoner.
Yes.
My name is Laura Raitoshi. I've been a member of this church for 20 years now. First of all, my husband and I just got back yesterday from an amazing trip to Greece. He was there for 5 weeks, but what I want to share with you is my daughter Noah, who many of you know, just got engaged.
Oh, nice.
Love her partner, and it's been a cause for celebration.
Hi, I'm Kathy Santo, and I just wanted to apologize because it seems that I was on schedule to be greeter and flower bringer today, but I didn't remember. And there was a time that the church secretary would send out reminders to people. So maybe we got to do that again.
Since you run that committee. You know what, I think it would probably be a good time, actually, to honor Kathy for running that committee, but also to honor everybody else. Please stand up if you've been a greeter. Literally, please, stand up if you've been a greeter this year. Please stand up. Yeah, everybody stand up. Thank you, thank you. Let's do a round of applause. Thank you for that. And, you know, I think it's probably also a good time to talk about the flower committee. I'm not sure that I think Marilyn is one of the leaders of that, right? And Maureen, and I think Virginia. So a lot of the people who are greeters actually are the same people who bring flowers. So thank you all. I think we should. All right. Now I've lost track of who else we have.
Hi, how are you? My name is Heather Brett. Hello?
You're on.
Oh, okay. Hi, my name is Heather Brett. I want to thank Christine Johnson for inviting me. I run a nonprofit called Help for Youth, and we do some stewardship on Robert Gould Shaw Glory Way over on Davis. And I'm a assistant professor at Columbia, but a lot of my work is around history and public health, and so I kind of followed his life for years. And when I learned of this, I was glad with Christine about, Unitarians, I guess I know. So I'm really happy that I'm here. I'm really excited to be here and looking forward to the rest of it.
Say the name of your nonprofit again.
Oh, sure. It's called Health for Youth, and we do a lot of the little free libraries, not yours, obviously, but we have a lot of honoring of your little free library. But we also take care of the Skyline Community Garden, and we do a lot of work around college readiness and so forth. So you see us bopping around.
I've seen you on set on community TV.
Yes, I was with Chef Massimo.
Yeah, I know, I saw the Sarah Blast one.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So.
Right, and I also know that you're the secretary now for the Hungry Task Force.
I am. That's right.
Welcome.
Where are you to me?
Thank you.
Hi, you may have noticed that that is not Ruth Benson, although your program says it is. So I'm not worship associate today because I had Mohs surgery on Thursday and I was still feeling a little deformed and not quite with it. So anyway, I'm recovering from it. Thank you very much. And thank you, Sarah, for stepping in.
Good to see you.
I'm Kevin Clark, and got some people we haven't seen in a while. Most of you know, though, that my wife Carolyn had uterine cancer surgery about 2 months ago. I started on chemotherapy. The chemotherapy is very hard on her. She's spending most of her time in bed, but hopefully she's here.
Kevin.
Say something, Larry? No. I just want to welcome John Adrian. Nice to see you again. And say that Bruce Gillen is here. Have we acknowledged that? Did I miss that?
Someone said that we're here with Bruce, but
How
say
about
hi,
Ben?
Bruce, to everyone home.
I'm sorry. Ben, are you ready to
Yes,
talk about who's in
yes.
the chat? Let me hand you. Do you need the mic?
Sure, please. So, first of all, there's a lot of people on Zoom, so if you're not seeing people who are usually here, they're here on the Zoom. And David and Sally want to send their greetings. They're happy to be able to attend all the way from Lacey, Washington. And they're having a great cross-country adventure. So they send their greetings.
Thank you, everyone.
So, of course, Sarah had embarrassed me by pointing out that I'm head of readers, and we celebrate all the people that helped reading and brought flowers, but I think a special thank you should go to the worship group because they do a whole lot harder job than readers and flower people, so they organize every service. So I want to thank them.
Okay. Everybody who's on the worship group.
I wasn't trying to embarrass you. I was trying to honor you.
All right, so thank you, everyone. We are grateful for all the joys and sorrows we've heard shared in our community and for all those that have gone unspoken. May the attention and care we give each other and those beyond this space remind us that we are not alone. We're now going to pause for meditation. I'm going to offer a quote to focus that meditation and then ring the bell. At that point, I invite you to begin the meditation with 3 deep breaths. And after a few minutes, I will ring the bell again to mark the end of our time. Today's quote by Angela Davis is, "I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept." Need to learn this.
Just one little tap.
Just tap
One little tap on the outside?
Yeah.
That's on the outside.
You can't.
It's not that simple. It's not that simple. There we go.
Yes.
There we go.
Now initiated into the brotherhood, sisterhood of the bell.
We will now take an offering. We know it's
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's not in my script.
Okay, yeah, gotta get this in. In 1842, Charles Dickens toured America, his first visit to America. He was greeted like a rock star. He was the real happening thing. And he kept a diary and sent messages back to his publisher about what this America was like. And this is one of the things he wrote. The fruits of the earth have their growth in corruption. Out of the rottenness of these things, there has sprung up in Boston a sect of philosophers known as Transcendentalists. On inquiring what this appellation might be supposed to signify, I was given to understand that whatever was unintelligible would be certainly transcendental. Not deriving much comfort from this elucidation, I pursued the inquiry still further and found that the Transcendentalists are followers of my friend Mr. Carlyle, or I should rather say of a follower of his, Mr. Ralph Waldo Emerson. This gentleman has written a volume of essays in which, among much that is dreamy and fanciful, if he will pardon me for saying so, there is much more that is true, honest, and bold. Transcendentalism has its occasional vagaries, what school does not, but it has good, healthful qualities in spite of them, not least among the number of hearty disgust of nonsense and an aptitude to detect her in all the million varieties of her everlasting wardrobe. And therefore, if I were a Bostonian, I think I would be a Transcendentalist. Now.
We will now take an offering. We know it is the gifts of all of us that help support our ability to thrive and to gather. For those attending in person, we invite you to drop your offering into the collection bowl. For those online, links and instructions will be posted in the chat. You can mail us a check or donate through the PayPal giving page on our website. Please give as generously as you can. Our offering will now be greatly received.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed the faithful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. I have seen him in the watchfires of 100 circling camps. They have builded him an altar in the evening dews and damps. I have read his righteous sentence by the dim and flaring lamps. His day is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory. glory, hallelujah. His day is marching on. I have read the fiery gospel, written burnished rows of steel. As ye deal with my contemners, so with you my grace shall deal. Let the hero born of woman crush the serpent with his heel, since God is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Since God is marching on. He has sounded forth his trumpet that shall never call retreat. He is sifting out the hearts of men before his judgment seat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Our God is marching on. In the beauty of the lilies, Christ was born across the sea, with a glory in his bosom that transfigures you and me. As he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free, while God is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah, while God is marching on.
That's exactly what I was looking for, my brother. Thank you so much. I'm going to cut the middle hymn. James Russell Lowell won't mind. The title of this sermon, How Unitarians from Staten Island Won the Civil War, is not mentioned as an irony, nor a joke, nor an exaggeration. It's history. It's history. And it's relevant today. I don't know how many of you noticed that when Mr. Trump did a press conference following his indictment, the site that he chose was a former Confederate munitions factory site in Columbus, Georgia. That was where he chose. The sermon today rests on research done primarily from 3 books. The first is by the Reverend John Burens, who, as many of you will remember, was the president of the Unitarian Universalist Association in the early 1990s. He was an associate at All Souls in New York, and a friend of mine and a lovely person. And I'm glad he wrote this book because he finally straightened out for me who these Transcendentalists were and how they interacted and their real impact. It's called Conflagration: How the Transcendentalists Sparked the American Struggle for Racial, Gender, and Social Justice. The other 2 are actually, I put copies back on the greeters table. There are copies donated to the church, so if anybody wants to take them home and read them, they can just bring them back. And one is a biography of Francis George Shaw called Seeking the One Great Remedy, Francis George Shaw and 19th Century Reform. and the other, edited by Russell Duncan, is Blue-Eyed Child of Fortune, the Civil War Letters of Colonel Robert Gould Shaw. Now, many of you have heard of Robert Gould Shaw and his wife Sarah Blake Shaw, but you're going to find out more about him today and why he's worth remembering, and why it's worth getting his picture out of the closet. Okay? And also this is about his son, Robert Gould Shaw, who led black troops into the Battle of Fort Wagner, which is now often considered the turning point of the Civil War, even more than Gettysburg. John Burns mentions the Shaws in his book a little bit, but in a conversation I had with him, he recognizes the central importance to the cause. Whoever's doing that should stop. The Shaws were a fabulously rich family. They were part of what was called the Boston Browns. And their fortune has a longer lineage than the family even. It goes back to well before the Revolutionary War. And several fortunes were won and lost until you have my sympathy, whoever phone that is. I have trouble as well. But the Shaw fortune came and went until Francis George Shaw's grandfather, who was named Sam Shaw. Those old Unitarians only had two names. He wished to rebuild the family fortune. He was distinguished himself as a soldier in the Revolutionary War. He got to know George Washington. That's how distinguished it was. And he was an attaché to John Jay on the first United States ship to China. He got in on the ground floor of the China trade. And he made a lot of money that is, to this day, they haven't spent it all. And the other thing that it learned is as you may, part of the China trade was going to Africa. And while Sam Shaw did not traffic in human slavery, he saw the effects of it. And he was one of the first ones that really saw it from that perspective. And he was an abolitionist before there was a word for it. And so George came to it honestly. The family grew up Anglican in church and religion, if not in politics. And Francis George Shaw was raised Anglican, but he married into a prominent Unitarian family, the Parkmans. You may recall Francis Parkman, one of the great historians. And one of his brothers was a Unitarian minister. So he married into Unitarianism, and let's just say the marriage took. His father was called Robert Gould Shaw. Robert Gould was one of the business partners back in generations before, and one of the many George Shaws honored his business partner by calling his son Robert Gould Shaw. And lineages of New England Brahmin families are really complicated because there's the Robert Gould Shaw, and then there's the son that we're talking about today, but he had two first cousins that were also called Robert Gould Shaw. Yeah, really, they didn't even, you can't call them all junior, but it should have been Robert Gould Shaw A, Robert Gould Shaw B, you know, something to help us out 150 years later. You know, it's really kind of difficult. But that's who Robert Gould Shaw's family was. Here's how Transcendentalism developed. Transcendentalists were the grandchildren of the Revolutionary War Unitarians. The Revolutionary War Unitarians were largely what is called deists. They were rebelling against primarily the Puritanism of the old Pilgrim sort of things, the old the old Boston people who first came over with Puritans. And a deist said Puritanism deals with emotion. Deism deals with revelation and reason. They were the first ones really in America to elevate reason as part of religious inquiry. And that came from their reading of British philosophy and utilitarians like Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, who believed not so much in the great redemption of God, but the greatest good for the greatest number. They were very practical men, and they were almost all men except for Abigail Adams. Now, in the area of the first part of the 19th century, there wasn't much action within Unitarianism. They were content to be deists, and many of them separated from their own churches, and there became Unitarian churches. The only exception to that, really, especially in terms of what we're dealing today, is John Quincy Adams. Of course, John Adams was a great Unitarian deist. His son, John Quincy Adams, carried on that tradition, but also was another proto-abolitionist. You may recall another movie called Armistead, which is about John Quincy Adams in 1842, sort of halfway between the Civil War and the Revolutionary War, successfully defending a mutinous slave ship that rose up against the captors and killed them and set themselves free. And he got an acquittal from them. And that was in the face of tremendous opposition. And so he was the one transitional character. So when the Transcendentalists came along, they were the grandchildren of the Revolutionary War generation. And like many grandchildren, they rebelled against the religion of their parents and grandparents. So instead of reason and revelation, the Transcendentalists were looking for a word they called the sublime. They were looking for something that transcended reason. It wasn't irrationality, it wasn't superstition like the Puritans. It was a deeper and higher relationship to the universe. And part of the reason that happened was that a lot of the very rich families in Boston would send their children either to school in Europe or to summer there in Europe, as Reverend Darrell Shaw did in his youth. And when they came back with German philosophy and British Romantic poetry. And the German philosophy was what was called higher criticism. It was not rejecting the Bible, it was looking at the Bible with the eyes of reason and with a higher revelation, if you will. That there was something meaningful about Jesus walking on water over and above whether or not he actually literally walked on water. So they brought that philosophy back, along with the Romantic poetry of people like Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who was a Unitarian minister in England, and Keats and Lord Byron, and all of that stuff, all that from the heart stuff. And they brought that back, and you can see that reflected in Emerson's writings and in this sublime experience of Thoreau, of Walden, and things like that. One thing that differentiated them from the deists was that women were more equally ensconced in the Transcendentalist movement than probably any other movement, until the 20th century. There were plenty of spouses and women, other women who took a full chair at the table of Transcendentalism. Amongst them, Louisa May Alcott, Julia Ward Howe, more about her later, and Margaret Fuller. Now, abolition as a movement was kind of moping along from the time of Armistead into the 1850s until things started happening to draw the distinctions and the polarization into greater relief. One was the Compromise of 1850, which when I was growing up was called the Missouri Compromise. Now it's called the Compromise of, so Missouri's out. Anyhow, what the Missouri Compromise did was that it overturned years of not legislation, but agreements and expectations that the North had that new states would come in as free. But the Missouri Compromise gave into what was called popular sovereignty, and each state could vote whether they wanted to have slavery or not. Does that sound familiar? Each state could vote for themselves on whether staying, and then in 1857 came a decision that really had an effect similar to the Dobbs decision. It's called Dred Scott. And Dred Scott lost. And the Supreme Court said that Dred Scott had no rights as a citizen because Dred Scott was an escaped slave. And that was really a touchstone on the Civil War. It really helped move forward the energy and the controversy and the division between North and South. And that took on a very material aspect as we moved into the 1850s between Missouri and Kansas. Missouri was a slave state. Kansas was going to vote to be free or slave. And the the slaveholders in Missouri thought they could discourage the vote in Kansas by having raids into Kansas, bloody Kansas, destruction of towns in Kansas by Quantrill's raiders and others. The James gang, Frank and Jesse James, got their start as raiders in Missouri. That's why they didn't really think they were breaking the law when they robbed federal banks. Really. And then there was a man named John Brown, who really was the lighter of the fire, because he took up arms and freed slaves and killed slave owners. He was hanged. Now, after John Brown was hanged, it came to the public attention after an investigation, but no indictments, that there were 6 men who were primary fundraisers for John Brown. 2 of them were Unitarians, and one was married to Julie Ward Howe. 2 of them were Unitarian ministers. One of them was Thomas Wentworth Higginson, who is probably my favorite Unitarian minister of all time. He could only get a job as a parish minister for 2 years because Transcendentalist ministers were not necessarily welcome in all Unitarian pulpits. It was very hard for them to find jobs. And he only spent 2 years in the parish, but later on he became the captain of a Southern regiment of black soldiers. And at night, he would listen to the songs they sang. And he wrote down the words. And that became the first written account of what is called Negro spirituals. That's how they were first written down. Later, he became one of the first Americans to lift weights. After that, because he couldn't get a job as a minister, he got a job as an editor at Harvard's, I think it was Harvard's. And he started getting letters from a young woman in Massachusetts saying, "Would you read my poetry and tell me what you think?" And he did. And he developed a long correspondence. There's a great book about it. He discovered and brought to the public Emily Dickinson. So this one guy, Negro Spirituals, Emily Dickinson. The other Unitarian minister that was part of the 6 that helped raise money for John Brown was Theodore Parker, more famous name amongst Unitarians. I don't know if they still are, but I had to read one of his great sermons in order to be ordained. And it's long, as this sermon is going to be, but it's really good. And Theodore Parker, again, had trouble finding a job as a minister because of his transcendentalist views, but he had his own church in West Roxbury, Massachusetts, which now is city, but then was pretty rural. And he kept a pistol in the drawer of his office. And not only did he serve as a chaperone to escaped former enslaved people on the Underground Railroad, he sometimes actually stole them away from slave catchers. And incidentally, he always took Universalists with him on his raids, because the Unitarians tended to be lawyers and accountants, and the Universalists tended to be blacksmiths and farmers. So, you know, you can't just have defensive backs. You need some linebackers and defensive linebackers if you're going to go after the slave catcher. Now, the Shaw family grew up, and Robert Gould Shaw was born in Boston on Beacon Hill. But in 1847, the Shaws moved. This is very interesting. Shaw was one of 10 children. And at age 31, Shaw said, I'm not a businessman. It's not for me. And his father, to his credit, said, oh, you got 10 who are. Go do what you want to do. And amongst what he did was he translated the novel of George Sand. He translated 3 of the novels from French of George Sand. That's what he did instead of being in business. That's the kind of guy he was. He knew all the Transcendentalists, and he moved down to West Roxbury, where George Shaw's minister was Theodore Parker. Theodore Parker is known for 2 quotes. One, he said, of the people, by the people, and for the people. And he also said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And that was who George Shaw listened to on Sunday morning. George Shaw also held part of the mortgage to Brook Farm. You know, Brook Farm was one of the great idealistic community failures in the history of America. All these transcendentalists got on this farm and they made wonderful conversation, but it turns out that transcendentalists are much better at raising ideas than raising vegetables. And so, like most of these utopian communities, they went bust after a while. But one of the kids, one of the teenagers who would go to summer camp at Brook Farm was George Curtis. George Curtis grew up in Rhode Island, but he was summer in Brook Farm. So it's not surprising that he ended up marrying one of George Shaw's daughters and moving to Staten Island. After Brook Farm went bust in 1847, the Shaw family moved to Staten Island. Because basically Staten Island was, in 1847, what Roxbury would have been 20 years earlier. In other words, he was seeking the country, but it was also close enough that he could also get his checks. You know, so it's sort of like the reason I live in the Poconos. You know, it's close enough to the city, but you don't have to die out. George Shaw was a very, very shy person. He never would speak in public, which is probably why he didn't become a Unitarian minister. Yet he was very personable and very strong of character. And this is what Margaret Fuller said about the Shaws. Margaret Fuller: there are few in this world so generous in appreciation and so loyal in act, so open to truth, and yet so tolerant of mixed characters as my friends the Shaws. And I would like to think that this congregation has inherited all of those qualities, especially the tolerance of mixed characters. They were quite a family. They moved down here because his wife was going blind. And I don't know how well known Dr. Elliott is here, but there was a Dr. Elliott who was the first eye doctor in the United States. He lived on Staten Island. And I could not find whether he was Unitarian or not, though Elliott is a huge Unitarian name. So I think it's like, and plus it drew a lot of Unitarians to him, and he cured her blindness. Whatever was wrong with her eyes, it cured. So it worked. But that was the main, that plus the bucolic openness of Staten Island is why the Shaws moved down here. It was founded in 1852, but there were two earlier churches that would have been here when the Shaws moved down here. I don't know if there's any other churches in the country that were founded by Unitarian abolitionist transcendentalists. There may have been some in the Midwest. I talked to John Burns about that. He said he thought there might, but he couldn't name any. So we'll see. But by the time they came down here, and by the time this church was formed, Dred Scott was on its way, and Missouri and Kansas was on its way. And a new party was formed called the Republican Party, and it ran John C. Fremont for president on a free the slaves ticket. Now, John C. Fremont, from what I understand, he was a very handsome, very overly confident, if anything, person. He was an officer in the Mexican War, and he took it upon him to free the slaves in any of the land in California that he took over. And he finally was dismissed. He said, no, you can't free the slaves. You don't have the power to do that. But that's what he wanted to do. I think of him as being sort of a Gavin Newsom of his time. And he ran for president against the charismatically challenged James Buchanan. And Buchanan won because the country was no way ready to hear what John Fremont had to say. But you know what? John C. Fremont was a good friend of George Shaw, and he ran his presidential campaign from Staten Island. But during the time of James Buchanan, he was a do-nothing president, so the polarization in the country continued up to Dred Scott and John Brown. And Lincoln was elected because there was a third party, and also because Lincoln ran on a platform not of freeing the slaves, but of uniting the country. Now, the Southerners never believed that for a minute. They always thought that as soon as he got in office, he would free the slaves. And he didn't, but they succeeded anyhow. So there you go. During the first couple of years, the Union cause did not go well. And I think it's because all of West Point were Confederate soldiers. You know, the Union soldiers were like bankers and farmers and stuff, you know, and all the officers were Confederates. So Julia Ward Howe was part of a contingent to go down and talk to Mr. Lincoln about how the cause was going. And if there's one person that I really have learned a lot about and really respect, is Julia Ward Howe. And I suggest you go back to her Wikipedia page and just read about her life and what she did. But anyhow, in 1862, she's just finished seeing President Lincoln, and there's a vast meeting house a vast meeting there, and they're singing John Brown's body lies a molded in the grave, John Brown's, which was actually first sung by Union troops in Kansas to the tune of an old camp meeting song. And she was next to James Freeman Clark, who was a big Unitarian minister up in Boston. He was not necessarily a transcendentalist, but he wasn't against them either. He was one of those guys that tried to pull all the factions of Unitarianism together. Good luck with that. But that's what he tried to do. And actually, as I read about him, he kind of reminds me of John Bjorns in the 1990s trying to keep all the factions together. And I assume if John Bjorns ever hears this, which he might, he would be very thrilled to know I compared him to James Freeman Clark. But James Freeman Clark turned to Julia Ward Howe and said, surely somebody can write better lyrics than that. And she went home and wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic. That moved the abolitionist movement, not just into political action, but to war. And the Transcendentalists became the great supporters of the Union war effort. And also, Thoreau died of tuberculosis in 1862. So the one great voice of nonviolence in the Transcendentalist movement was gone. And the key to the Transcendentalist support for the war, which is why I wanted Kevin to sing this, is the one line, as he, meaning Jesus, as he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free. Let us die to make men free. This is no metaphor. This is what they did. The governor of Massachusetts had long wanted to recruit a black regiment, which was quite controversial at the time. And he asked George Shaw if his son would lead it. Now, Robert Gould Shaw joined a regiment from Massachusetts with the rest of his Harvard buddies. But they saw a lot of action. Robert Gould Shaw was at Antietam. He knew what the war was like. And he first, if you haven't seen that movie Glory for a while, I recommend you go back and see it, especially after this. It's considered to be one of the most, if not the most realistic Civil War movies ever made. And when I was reading about it, it said that the director cut out several scenes between Robert Gould Shaw and his parents because he didn't want to put too much emphasis on the white captain. And I think thematically, also Jane Alexander played his mother, so, you know. But at first he didn't want to do it. Robert Gould Shaw did not want to take it because he wanted to stay with his buddies, partially because a lot of them had died already, and he felt some loyalty to that group. And also because he was uncertain of his leadership capabilities. He had never led troops into battle before. And third, he was not sure that the black troops could cut it. And that's well documented in the movie. And as I read about this, it's almost off-putting how eager his parents were for him to take the commission. But you know who else was in that regiment? Two sons of Frederick Douglass, a grandson of Sojourner Truth. And he joined and took that command because of his mother. He didn't write a letter to his father when he was dressing as a girl in Paris. Like a lot of us, he had easier communication with his more outgoing mother than he did with his very shy and introverted father. And the letters are amazing, they're mostly to his mother. So he took that command because of his mother. And as we know, he died at the parapets of Fort Wagner, along with over 200 of the black 54th Regiment. And he was put in a single grave, unmarked. And after the war, the War Department got back to his parents and said, "We would like to inter his body and give him a separate burial." He said, "No way. He wants to be there with his troops." 2 months after Fort Wagner, 2 months after Fort Wagner, there were 40 new regiments of black soldiers. Eventually, there were 145. 179,000 black men served. They took casualties at twice the rate of white soldiers, and 37,000 of them died. And they would say, "As he died to make men holy, let us die to make us free." But then, 10 years later, Julia Ward Howe wrote something else called the Mother's Day Proclamation. After she had advocated going to war, she now wrote of the results of the war. And she wrote, "We will not have great questions decided by irrelevant agencies." And following this is one of the strongest sentences I think I've ever read. "Our husbands shall not come to us, reeking with carnage, for caresses and applause. Our sons shall not be taken from us, to unlearn all that we have been able to teach them of charity, mercy, and patience. We women of one country will be too tender to those of another country to allow our sons to be trained to injure theirs." And why is it that today all Americans know the battle hymn of the Republicans and no Americans know the Mother's Day Proclamation? As important as Gettysburg was to the outcome of the war, Fort Wagner was more important. And the history I grew up with didn't mention it at all. It was, and toward the end of the war, even some black men fought. Now, a committee soon after the war raised money for a monument to Robert Gould Shaw. And they commissioned August St. Gaudens to do it. Now, there's one August St. Gaudens in Manhattan, and it's the gold-plated statue of General Sherman on 59th Street and Fifth Avenue. You know, it has sort of a winged victory, and it's amazing because I knew it all along, and then one day it was covered in gold. Holy cow. But that's an August St. Gaudens. He's kind of specialized in Civil War monuments. So they really went up, top shelf for this monument. So August St. Gaudens starts sculpturing the heroic Robert Gould Shaw on horseback, naturally. They took it to his mother, the plans. She said, no. You got to put his men in too. It's not just him. You got to put the men in. And that's on the cover of your order of service. It only took August St. Gaudens 14 years to put the men in, which is why the dedication of the memorial is in 1897. And the keynote speaker was William James, who was one of the preeminent intellectuals of the day. He invented psychology, which is usually a plus. and philosophy of religion, which was my hobby and still is for a long time. But he had a brother who was an adjutant in the 49th Regiment. He came home alive. An adjutant means like a secretary. He was Robert Gould Shaw's secretary, basically. And that's why William James was the keynote speaker. The closing words were given by Booker T. Washington. So that's how important the memorial was. And there's a couple of quotes from William James that prove William Faulkner's quote, "The past is never over, it's not even past." I had to quote some Southern here. But listen to what William James said in 1897. "The deadliest enemies of nations are not their foreign foes. They always dwell within their borders. And from these internal enemies, civilization is always in need of being saved. The nation blessed above all nations is she in whom the civic genius of the people does the saving day by day, by acts without external picturesqueness, by speaking, writing, voting reasonably, by smiting corruption swiftly, by good temper between parties, by people knowing true office holders when they see them, and preferring them as leaders to rabid partisans and empty quacks. Such nations have no need of wars to save them. Their accounts with righteousness are always even, and God's judgments do not have to overtake them fitfully in bloody spasms and convulsions of the race." But here's the real thing coming up here. "The secret and the glory of our people consists in nothing but two common habits, two inveterate habits carried into public life. Habits so homely that they lend themselves to no rhetorical expression, yet habits more precious perhaps than any that the human race has gained. They can never be too often pointed out or praised. One of them is the habit of trained and disciplined good temper towards the opposition party when it fairly wins its innings. And the other, that of fierce and merciless resentment toward every man or set of men who overstep the lawful bounds of fairness or break the public peace." No, Staten Island Unitarians didn't win the Civil War, I guess. Black soldiers did. But the Shaws opened the door, and Robert Gould Shaw died to make them free. So our banner, it ought to say, Black Lives Matter since 1852. Closing hymn.
Yes. 119 in your great hymn book. Now this accompaniment starts with a solo trumpet playing the whole hymn from beginning to end. So be patient, you'll get your chance.
we share its treasured cross, ere that cross bring fame and profit, and most prosperous to be just. Though the cause of evil prosper, yet His truth alone is strong. Though its portion be the scaffold, and upon the throne be wrong, then it is the brave one chooses, while the coward stands aside, till the multitude make virtue of the faith they have begun.
Please be seated. The first hymn was written by Ralph Waldo Emerson. The third hymn was written by James Russell Lowell. The Lowells married into the Shaw family, but who did it?
I'm going to extinguish the chalice.
Oh.
So before I do,
Yes.
I need, I know you like baseball.
Yeah.
I don't know if you like baseball cards, but I need for you over the summer to come up with a whole set of transcendentalist.
Transcendentalist trading cards.
Cards.
Oh, man.
Unless that already exists, I think you could make a lot of money on them.
Well, since
maybe not.
Unitarians represent 1/10% of the population of the United States, I'm not looking at a big profit margin here.
Are you busy this summer though? I think it would really be cool.
That's a really cool idea.
I need it. I feel like I heard a whole lot of new names.
Yeah, yeah, that's
That I,
good.
you know,
That's
Elliott and Fremont and all that.
That's
I didn't hear any of these.
Yes, and as far as baseball cards, I wrote for 10 years for baseball.
Okay. So you are the person to.
I am.
Are you busy this
Well,
summer?
you know,
Are
I
you
and
busy?
John Burens are the people. Actually.
All right, so let me extinguish the chalice and then you can do your closing words. I invite you to join me in extinguishing our chalice. The words are in your order of service. Ready? We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of communion. For these we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
And these are the closing words of Booker T. Washington at the dedication of the memorial to the 54th Regiment. One of the wishes that lay nearest to Colonel Shaw's heart was that his black troops might be permitted to fight by the side of white soldiers. Have we not lived to see that wish realized, and will it not be more so in the future? Not at Wagner, not with rifle and bayonet, but on the field of peace, in the battle of industry, and the struggle for good government, and the lifting up of the lowest to the fullest opportunities. In this we shall fight by side of white men north and south. And if this be true, as under God's guidance it will be, that old flag, the emblem of progress and security, will still be borne aloft by Southern soldier and Northern soldier, and in a more potent and higher sense, we shall realize this.
you, everyone, and so ends our service and begins our summer break. Please join us in the parish hall for hospitality. Thank you, Reverend Berger.